Hello, today you will hear an incredible story. My name is Ben and I live in the United States. When I was 11 years old, I was a very rebellious and depressed child. I went through that phase after turning 11. One day, coming home from school, I told my mom I was really sad and wanted to die. Although I didn't actually want to die in the moment, it felt like it. Later that night, my parents decided to take me to the only mental hospital institution in my city. Of course, I didn't want to go, but they forced me. When we arrived at the mental hospital, I was placed into a room where a doctor spoke to me. He was very kind and I stayed there for 6 hours. It was 1 a.m. when my parents and a doctor came in to check on me and they said they agreed it would be best for me to stay at the institution for 7 days. I started freaking out, but they calmed me down. I said goodbye to my parents and a counselor took me upstairs. I thought I would get my own room or something, but instead, I was placed in a gym-like area where there were about 150 kids all packed together in little beds side by side. I was given a nasty-looking mattress next to 2 sleeping kids. Day 1 seemed to be a decent day. They woke us all up at 9 a.m., which was unpleasant since I arrived there at 1:30 in the morning. But right when we went to the dining hall, I could tell this was not going to be a fun time. The entire breakfast they served us was plain toast bread. Nothing else. We could only ask for a cup of water in a small plastic cup to drink. When I asked if that was all we were getting and if I could have more because I was very hungry, a counselor yelled at me and called me ungrateful. The other kids around me, who were all around my age, told me not to ask for any favors. Something that struck me was that they all looked so pale, depressed, and dead inside. Throughout the day, counselors talked to us, sometimes in groups and individually, about our mental problems. We weren't offered lunch and our next meal was at 7 p.m., where once again we were given 2 small buns and a cold piece of meat. That was all for dinner, along with a small cup of water. When I went to sleep that night, I noticed something I didn't on the first night. There were counselors walking past the sleeping kids every 5 minutes. It was weird. Day 2 was much worse. Same breakfast, same experience. Dinner was terrible again, and someone even stole my dinner. When I asked for dinner, citing the fact that someone had literally stolen it, a counselor said I should have taken better care of it. I actually began to cry, and a counselor yelled at me to stop. Day 3 was a nightmare. When I didn't wake up the first time we were called, a counselor came up to me and grabbed my hair. When I told him he couldn't touch me, he punched my forehead and told me to wake up. That day was pretty bad because they made us do exercises for some reason. I hadn't taken a shower in the 3 days I was there, and I asked a counselor when we were going to take showers. He replied that only the children who behaved well were allowed to take showers. Once a week, we run down the list and the least behaved children are at the bottom. If the 2-hour time limit passes, the children whose names we haven't gone through don't take a shower. I was actually confused by what he said, so I asked a kid who was next to me, and he explained that if you ask the counselors these questions, you pretty much don't take a shower. Speaking of the bathrooms, they were disgusting. You could tell they hadn't been cleaned. There was one bathroom for boys in the hall where we slept, and it was full of urine on the floor and it reeked of urine and other smells. You could tell it had not been cleaned in at least a week or 2. Day 4 was quite possibly the worst day. I took my time getting to the dining hall, and so my breakfast got taken. The same thing happened with my dinner later on in the day. The counselors refused to give me food right before going to bed. That day I told a counselor to give me food in a loud voice that caused me to be borderline dragged to the office of the person they called the president, who was basically the leader of the hospital institution. He told me that he was going to call my parents and tell them I would have to stay in the hospital for longer if I kept acting up. I was afraid by this point. When I went to bed that night, a kid who was to the left of my bed, named Matthew, asked me why I was here. I told him it was because I misbehave a lot and because I said I wanted to die. He explained that he was only here because his parents were called once when he misbehaved in school. He told me his 7 days were extended to 3 weeks, and then again to 2 months, for doing the same thing. I was complaining to the counselors, and that's when I was about to lose it. I could be here for months. He told me to keep quiet because we were supposed to be asleep. That's when I saw him pull out what looked like a cell phone from his bed sheets. I asked him how he managed to smuggle that in, to which he said it was his mom's second phone and he stole it when he realized he would be coming here. He put it in his shoe. I have no clue how that kid's phone still had battery after 1.5 months of being in that hellhole. I asked if I could use his phone to call my parents. He gave me his phone and I dialed my dad first. I was afraid they wouldn't answer because it was around 10:30 p.m. and they sleep early because they have early jobs. My dad did not pick up, so I called my mom. Right after hanging up, when it was clear she wouldn't answer, my dad called. I answered and explained it was Ben and how they were literally starving me here. I told him everything and begged him to pick me up because I couldn't take it anymore. Before he could even say anything, I hung up because a counselor was making his nightly rounds and he was getting close. I gave Matthew back his phone and said thank you. The next day was my last. At breakfast, my toast got stolen once again, but not my water. Matthew at this point told me straight up that he was going to get revenge upon himself or his parents after he left the hospital. I was actually shocked that someone would do harm to their parents for bringing them here. He said it was just a thought and that he loved his parents, so he wouldn't do that. At around noon, I was called to the office of the president again, where my parents were waiting. My parents were explaining that they wanted me to come home. I gave my parents a big hug in the office. Never before had I been so glad to see them. My parents asked the president of the institution, as well as a doctor and counselor who were present, if the rumors of me being starved were true. They were told it was a lie, and the counselor even showed a picture on his old iPhone 4 of children happily eating in the dining hall. However, that picture was completely false. I did not see a single child smiling during my time there. Despite my parents believing the hospital side of the story, they still took me home. As I was leaving, the counselor who had pulled my hair just days earlier gave me a last pat on the back. My parents never truly believed my story, but they still took me to the police station about a month later to give a statement. Unfortunately, the police were unable to do anything, as there were no security cameras in the hall and no proof of the abuse. I was disappointed, but I knew it wasn't their fault. I told almost everyone in my city about my experience, and ever since then, strange things have been happening at my house. 2 years ago, my mom's car tires were popped. She hired a private investigator to look into the incidents, including the tire popping and a fire that was started at our house. While the investigator couldn't find any concrete evidence, he did discover that the person responsible for popping my mom's tires was a 32-year-old man. At first, this didn't seem out of the ordinary, until he found a picture of the man and the president of the hospital institution on the man's Facebook profile. That's when it became clear that this was all being done by someone associated with the hospital seeking retribution. We had planned to move out of the city in March, but our plans were delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are finally moving in about 20 days, and the last attack on my family was a few months ago when our garage was spray painted. My mom decided not to press charges against the 32-year-old, and we just want to leave and not be bothered anymore. My only advice is this. If you are considering sending your child to a mental hospital or institution, please do not leave them alone with a counselor, doctor, or anyone from the institution. And do not leave them alone for more than a day. It has been almost 10 years since my experience, and I hope that Matthew's doing okay and hasn't done anything bad. I also hope that he was able to get out of the institution. To our dear listeners, please like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates me to release new videos for you.